Hey everybody, Kanaye here, bringing you an episode of the Crossover U podcast as part of the Crossover Media Network. So today we're going to be doing a Big East preseason overview. Just going to take a look at some of the teams and expectations going into the season. So the Big East had a really great showing last year, super competitive league. Ultimately, only got 3 teams selected in the tournament. Of course, it probably should have been a 5 or 6 bid league with teams like St. John's, Providence, and Seton Hall ultimately being victims of bid stealers, not to point fingers. NC State, I'm winning the ACC tournament, probably ended up knocking at least 1 or 2 of those teams out of contention to get into the tournament. But this year, I think Big East is going to be no different. It's one of the most physical conferences and a league where any team can go into any given game with full chances to win, other than, let's just say, DePaul and Georgetown. But without further ado, let's take a look at some of these teams. We're going to be looking at these teams in the order that they came in the preseason Big East coaches poll. So where these Big East coaches felt these teams stacked up compared to the others in the league. So to get started, we'll start with DePaul, who came in last in this preseason poll. DePaul came in 11th, and of course, DePaul was not competitive in the slightest last year. They fired their coach mid-season, and this year they're going in with first-year head coach Chris Holtman, who pretty much has put together a retooled roster, highlighted primarily by transfers Connor Enright from Drake and Isaiah Rivera from UIC, to round out their backcourt. Now, I'm pretty comfortable saying this DePaul team won't be competitive this year. It's tough. They're a rebuilding program. They have a first-year head coach, new players. They're just trying to get something which they can build upon and have that to build upon to go into seasons in the future. Of course, you do hope that they try to be a little bit more competitive than they were last year. There are talks, of course, that there's a chance they could end up getting kicked out of the Big East if they cannot, put together a winning roster, winning teams, and competitive culture there. But I think largely it would be a successful season if they can pick up at least a win or two, maybe, aim for 4 wins in the Big East play, I'd say. That would be a huge win for them. Do I think that's going to happen? Probably not. But, again, first-year coach, rebuilding program, there's not much you can expect out of them. Moving on, we have Seton Hall, which came in at 10th, which is a little surprising to me, just because I get that they lost a lot with Kadari Richmond being, probably someone who was the best transfer out of the cycle, in my opinion. And of course, they're going into year 3 with Shaheen Holloway. Shaheen's a really good coach, and he's bringing back guys like Alamir Dawes, Dylan Adewusu. You're also bringing in prior from last year, a Big East, someone who made the Big East all-freshman team in Isaiah Coleman, who I think is going to have a chance to make a big sophomore leap in year 2. But yeah, I just found it a little shocking that they came in on a 10th. I probably would have had them over Georgetown, but I guess I can see where Big East coaches are coming from in this poll. But I also think an interesting storyline to watch out for is the return of Zion Harmon. Of course, we know the situation with him, and him being able to play basketball again was really. I think that's a great story. And I think there's a chance he can be a breakout player for them this year. So, yeah, I don't think this team will be has any chance of really being the upper of the teams in this conference, and I definitely don't think they make the tournament. Obviously they came off the 2024 NIT championship from last season, which was big for them. And, I think they got a chance to, they're building something over in East Orange, State, where I think they have a chance to be competitive going forward, but this year probably not. So Georgetown coming on Ed Cooley's year 2. Will he bounce back? That's the question here. They are returning the high scorer Jaden Epps, who I believe scored around 18 points per game last year. I think he might actually be the highest returning scorer in the Big East this season. And they were all also able to top Ivy League transfer Malik Mack, who absolutely lit the Ivy League last year for Harvard. I think he's definitely a potential breakout star this season. And again, Cooley, he might not be likable, especially out in Friartown, but I think, at the end of the day, he is a good coach. And I think now that he's able to bring in some guys that he himself was able to pick out, um, I think they're going to start moving back to trying to make Georgetown a competitive program. To Georgetown with their illustrious history, especially in the Big East, they've were always competitive, and I think they're starting to move towards that with Ed Cooley. Do I think it's going to be this year though? Probably not. I mean, it's just the roster, the way it stacks up compared to the others in this league. Just I don't think they have enough. Jaden Epps definitely has a chance to be on an All Big East team this year, just because of the scoring output he has. But I don't think it's going to be enough to make Georgetown a threat in the Big East this year. So now let's talk a little bit about Butler, and who came in at number 8 in the preseason poll in the Big East. So this year, Thad Matta is going to be really relying upon returnees Pierre Brooks and Jamal Telfort. They both had really impressive seasons last year. I think both averaged around 13 to 14 points per game. So I think you're just going to look for them to continue to build upon those seasons they had last year. That's going to be largely their best chance of being competitive this year. Someone else to watch out for in the Butler program is transfer Patrick McCaffrey from Iowa. I know he's a really good, talented shooter. Has a chance to hit shots for them, and I think Butler, they struggled a little last year with injuries and everything, and this year they're going to be relying primarily upon Brooks and Telford to really win you games, and I just don't know if that's enough to build a winning recipe for success in the Big East. But of course, Thad Matta is a really good coach, and I'm sure he'll figure out a lineup that he can put out there in order to try and give Butler a chance to win some more games this year. So now we'll talk about kind of getting more towards the potential contenders in this league. We're going to talk about Villanova now. Came in at number 7. That's a little low for Villanova, in my opinion. I get it. Kyle Neptune up to this point hasn't had the greatest showing as head coach of the Wildcats. But, with them returning Eric Dixon, who has a chance to be an All-American this year, and is definitely going to be, and was a first-team Big East selection for the preseason, I think there's a chance there for them to maybe not make the tournament, but at least be in that upper 4 or 5 teams in the Big East this year. I mean, they're going to have to be. All eyes are on Kyle Neptune this year with with how much he's struggled the last few years and all the money he's received for NIL in terms of trying to land recruits and trying to land transfer portal acquisitions, and not being able to do that. I know the boosters are going to be frustrated with him, and I know the university, they want to get back to winning. So it's going to be a really crucial year for Kyle Neptune to try to turn things around. Someone who I think has a chance to make a big impact for them is Wooga Poplar from Miami. He can do some stuff off the dribble, try to help Eric Dixon out, take a little bit of pressure off him. But at the same time, this is Eric Dixon's team. And, I think Eric Dixon's going to come and motivate this year. He was on that Final Four team just a few years back. And I know he doesn't want to go out in his last season as a grad student with a losing record. I'd like to think that, he's going to give it his all this year. And I think he will. And I think he has a chance to make Nova competitive this year. So now we'll talk about year 2 in Friartown for Kim English and the Providence Friars. So a lot of great things happened last year for Kim English in year 1. Of course, they ended up missing the tournament. NC State winning the ACC tournament more than likely knocked Providence out of the tournament this past season. And of course, they lost a lot. I mean, they lost the Big East Player of the Year, Devin Carter, to the NBA, who was a lottery pick, if I'm not mistaken. And they also lost guys like, the starters like Josh Oduro and Ticket Gaines, just a big interior presence with Oduro and a good shooter with Ticket Gaines, good 3-and-D guy. And of course, you have Bryce Hopkins, who's coming off the injury from last year. If they had Bryce Hopkins last year, they're a tournament team. They're a top 25 team throughout the whole season. And they make the tournament. With a guy like Devin Carter who can light it up on any given night, I don't see why they couldn't have went on a little bit of a run. But of course, it's all part of the game, the injuries and everything. And I think a big storyline to watch this season, going into the season for Providence, is, will Bryce Hopkins be back to form? Of course, coming off the ACL tear, it's not guaranteed that he is the player he was before the tear. And I think to expect him immediately to be the way he was before his injury is not realistic. And I do think he will be back to form at some point, but it might not be right off the bat, which is why I think they're going to need Jaden Pierre to have a really big they're going to need Jaden Pierre to take the next step. He had a solid season playing the point last year for the Friars, and I think if he can build off that and continue to shoot the ball a little bit more consistently, get guys the ball, then they have a chance to, be towards the top of this league. But at the same time, I just don't know if Kim English necessarily addressed their needs in the portal as to the best of his abilities. I know they did pick up a few mid-major guys who have a chance to do some stuff for them, but I just don't know if that's necessarily going to be enough for them to be in that kind of upper echelon of the Big East. And overall, I just think, making the tournament would be a more than successful year for Kim English. And I think he's a really good coach, and he's going to be able to build off what he did from last year. He's got lots of support from the fans. The players buy into his culture, and I think they're really going to have a chance to be competitive in the next few years. This year might be tough, but I definitely think they could end up being in that upper tier of the Big East. So now let's talk about let's get into the top four of the preseason Big East poll. Now, these are the teams I think have the best chance to win the Big East this year. And with the first of them being St. John's, who came in at number 4 in this preseason poll in the Big East. So obviously, year 2 for Pitino seems to be year 2s are a really big theme this year for the Big East. But I think Pitino will be coming back with a vengeance. A lot of people are down him now after that rocky first season with the Johnnies. Of course, there's the situation that happened where he kind of called out his players in an interview, in a post-game interview. And, a lot of people thought, okay, maybe Rick Pitino starting to lose some of his, starting to lose it a little bit. But, they had a chance to make the tournament at the end of the year, picking up a big win against Creighton at home at MSG late in the season. And they probably played Connecticut the best out of any team throughout the whole season. Every matchup UConn had with St. John's was very tight, especially that Big East tournament game in the semifinals. I mean, St. John's had full chance to win that game. But, again, that's obviously not what ended up happening, which I think is going to motivate Rick Pitino going into this year too. Of course, he lost some guys. He lost Danis Jenkins, who was their leading scorer last year. He also did lose Joel Soriano, who was a big presence down low. However, he was able to land quite possibly the best transfer out of this past cycle in Kanaye Richmond, who transferred over from Seton Hall. I think Kanaye is going to be a perfect fit to play into Rick Pitino's style offense, as well as defense. Rick Pitino loves to run that 2-3 zone press, and I think Kanaye Richmond is just going to be able to excel in that. But there are concerns about Kanaye. With this is his third school he's at. He started at Syracuse. Jim Boeheim talked about for concerns with Kanaye. Kanaye ended up kind of turning things around at Seton Hall. He was able to put together a really productive 3 years, especially last year, where you can make the argument he was maybe one of 5 players in the country who could go out and single-handedly win you a game last year. Of course, with him picking up a triple-double or 2 last year, and just being a high-level distributor, defender, and slasher. And then they were also to get a grad transfer from Utah, Devin Smith, another guy who is going to be on triple-double watch on a nightly basis. He's a guy who is a decent shooter, but I think Pitino's going to look for him to be a little bit more consistent of a shooter going into this year. And he's also able to do a little bit off the dribble. I think those guards are going to be great for St. John's this year. And overall, I think Pitino did a really good job in building this roster. However, the biggest concern, I think, for them is shooting. They just don't have many proven shooters. I think they're going to need Brady Dunlap to make a really big leap in year 2. I think that it's going to be really important for him to be able to come in, hit open shots, just be a guy that, you can rely on to hit big shots and big moments. Just because they just don't have the shooting I think you'd like to see for a team to have potential tournament success. I think you're also going to look for guys like RJ Luis to have a big jump this year too, just being able to handle the ball a little bit more and also being able to hit more shots. And overall, I think Rick Pitino has a really good chance with this roster to be able to compete, just to get size of the guards and his sets that he runs. I think they have full chance to win the Big East this year. Um, I think they're definitely going to, I think the Johnnies will, I know they weren't preseason top 25. I think they'll sneak in there at some point. Could be even within the first 2 weeks of the season once it starts. I think they'll be a top 25 team throughout the year. So now let's talk a little bit about Marquette. Obviously, Marquette was towards the top of the Big East for the last 2 seasons, having Tyler Kolek and Oso Ighodaro. Of course, those guys both left. They're both in the NBA now. But they were able to keep Cam Jones, which was probably the biggest thing this past offseason for Marquette. Cam Jones averaged around 17 points per game this year, and he's a guy who's going to be on All-American watch. He's a bucket. He's going to be huge for Marquette this year. He's just a guy who can go out and get you points like instantly. And I mean, they were also able to bring back guys like Stevie Mitchell, who is a great perimeter defender and has to work a little bit on the offensive side of the ball, but has full capabilities to do that. And they also brought back guys like David Joplin and Ben Gold. David Joplin's really talented. I think he has a chance to take a big step forward in this year. And I think you'd also look out for Ben Gold to break out. I know, people have said this for the last few years, and he kind of really hasn't done it up to this point. But I do think this year is finally the year Ben Gold truly breaks out and is able to do some stuff for Marquette, both on defense and both being able to kind of be an offensive hub possibly on offense where they can run DHOs and screens, a little bit of pick and pop with him. And I think he has a chance to fully do that. But again, this team's going to be relying completely on the offensive output of Cam Jones. No moves in the portal this season for Shaka Smart, which is business as usual for him in this Marquette program. They, for whatever reason, don't see the value in going to the portal. And overall, it's really, it's all on Cam Jones this year. They're going to need him to go out, and they're going to need him to probably average, 18 to 20 points this season in order for them to continue to stay atop the Big East in that upper 1 to 3 team tier of this conference. And Shaka is a good coach. I mean, he's going to be able to figure out how to put his guys in the best position to win, which I think he has full capabilities of doing this year. And Marquette could very much be right back in the mix in the Big East this year. So let's talk about Xavier a little bit. So by far the biggest one for Sean Miller was getting back Zach Fremantle and Jerome Hunter, who both missed the majority, if not the entire last season, all due to injury. I think getting those two guys back, hopefully healthy and back to form, is the biggest factor for Xavier going into this year. You have to remember, this is a team that was super successful in the Big East 2 years ago. That team swept UConn in the regular season, and I think if those guys are back to form, they have a full chance to win a Big East title this year. They also were able to land transfers like Ryan Conwell from Indiana State, who can bring a lot to the table for them. He's a good shooter. He's able to do a little bit off the dribble. And they also have David McKnight, who had a really, really strong 2024 campaign. They have guards who are, strong guards who can shoot it a little bit, and they're going to be able to defend at a pretty high level. And I think they're going to cause a lot of trouble for some of these teams in the Big East, especially when they're matching up with the teams that have smaller guards this year, like Creighton and like UConn and Marquette. I mean, the guards in the Big East, they're just, kind of going back to St. John's too. St. John's, the size of their guards, they have bigger guards this year, which is normally what you see in the Big East. But this year, there's a lot of teams with smaller guards, and I think teams like Xavier and St. John's are going to have a really good chance to give those teams a lot of problems just with the size of their backcourt this year. I think Sean Miller, he's definitely going to want it. I think with them struggling last year with the injuries and everything, I think there's a lot of motivation going to this year that they can go ahead and win a Big East title this year. They have a great chance to be able to do that. I think Sean Miller's going to put his guys in the right position to be able to compete for that. And Zach Freeman, that guy's a star. he's gonna be this year. I really like the transfer Ryan Connell. I think he has a chance to be a breakout star this year in the Big East, and I think Xavier is someone who a lot of people should be looking for this year in this conference. So now let's talk about Creighton. Ryan Kalkbrenner's back. He is past few years he's been one of the most underrated players in the sport. Going into this season, he's probably the best rim protector in the country. And I mean, the guy is super disciplined. He never fouls. Yes, Creighton's going to need him to have a higher offensive output this year with the losses of Baylor Shireman and Trey Alexander. But I think Ryan Kalkbrenner is fully capable of that. I think back to the Alabama game where he got hurt earlier in the game and he came back and essentially won them that game against Alabama. Um, and of course, you know what he brings to the table defensively. Great rim protector. He's going to be in the game because he doesn't foul. And of course, he's a guy who can, he's fully capable of improving like his offensive output. I mean, he's a guy who can step out, hit the 3-point shot, and he's going to be tasked with doing a lot more DHOs, being kind of a little bit of more of an offensive hub for Creighton this year. I think one of the biggest factors for McDermott at Creighton this year is going to be the play of Stephen Ashworth. We do like second-year transfer guards in college basketball, but there are the height limitations that come with having Stephen Ashworth play the point. It's kind of a matter of just being able to run your offense from 30 feet out, right around the three-point line, rather than from 35 feet, where you're super just far away from where you'd like to see a lot of your sets. I think Mason Miller is going to be super crucial for this team, as well as Texas Tech transfer Pop Isaacs. Pop Isaacs is a guy who's going to be able to get you some buckets. He do a lot off the dribble. He's a solid distributor. And I also think they have a freshman in Larry Johnson who he's really talented on the offensive side of the ball. From videos I've seen from the preseason thus far, he's a righty, but he looks supernatural when he goes to his left, and he's gonna be able to do a lot off the dribble. And if he does get impact minutes this year, then I think he's going to excel in whatever role he's placed in. And going into one of the most under-talked storylines heading into this year is the eligibility questions surrounding Fedor Zugic. Fedor Zugic is a guy who was Creighton landed this past offseason and played in one of the top Euro leagues and averaged 13 points per game. So this guy is 21 years old, if I'm not mistaken, and the guy played professional basketball. I mean, at the end of the day, he probably shouldn't be able to play college basketball, but I could very much see it ending up like a Big Z situation with Kentucky last season, where he does get eligible midseason and is granted access to be able to play. But I mean, again, I don't think this guy should be granted eligibility just because of, the fact that he was playing professional basketball at one of the highest levels you can. And I mean, if he does get declared eligible, then we're talking about a potential Final Four team here. Without this guy, I don't know. I mean, it's obviously a possibility with when you have Ryan Kalkbrenner to make a Final Four. But I mean, if this guy gets eligible, you're talking about a Big East championship and Final Four potential national championship team here. Just the fact of being able to have a professional basketball player on your roster is kind of insane. And if this guy does get eligible, then I don't see why Creighton doesn't have a chance to go all the way this year, possibly. But again, as it stands right now, he hasn't been granted eligibility yet. And right now, they're coming in at second in this preseason coaches poll, which I fully agree with, because now we're going to be talking about the defending back-to-back national champs, the Connecticut Huskies. So that is the question heading into the season. Can UConn three-peat? All eyes are on Dan Hurley after turning down the Laker job to come back and coach in Stores. But of course, it's important to mention no team in the country has lost as much as UConn in the past 2 years. They lost 4 of their 5 starters from last season, and 2 lottery picks in Donovan Kling and Stephon Castle, and then of course 2 starters in grad transfer Camp Spencer and 2-year transfer Tristan Newton, both going to the NBA as well. And of course, Hurley had to go and reload. I think he did a fair job trying to do that. He was able to land few freshmen, top 40 freshmen, such as Amon, probably won't be seen this season, but he was able to land five-star freshman Liam McNeely, who originally was committed to Indiana, flipped his commitment over to Connecticut. He was also able to go get two transfers in the portal in Terrace Reed Jr., who will be playing the five, um, either behind Samson Johnson or he does have the potential to start. As Hurley's came out and said, there are no defined roles just yet. He was also able to land Aiden Mahaney from St. Mary's out in California, and he's a guy who could potentially start for this team this year, but also, as we saw in the URI scrimmage, came off the bench and was able to score a good amount in that role as sixth man. So, there's no set starting lineup for this team this year, but I think an important thing to talk about is while the roster makeup is solid, it's nowhere near as strong as it's been the last 2 years. While this team does have the potential to be the best shooting team Hurley's had at UConn up to this point, they're going to be really, really reliant on, this program's banking on the sophomore leaps they're going to hopefully get from guys like Solo Ball, Jalen Stewart, Jaden Ross. If those guys can make those leaps, then I don't see why UConn won't be back in national championship contention. However, you can't necessarily bank on that. Solo Ball has all the makings and all signs point to him being a breakout player this year. Jalen Stewart, I think Hurley talked about, that he'd like to see a little bit more. He thought maybe he'd be a little bit further along at this point. Another question for this team is, will Hassan Diarra be able to play the point effectively to the level Tristan Newton has been able to the last 2 years? Of course, I don't think it's necessarily fair to expect a huge scoring jump from Hassan Diarra. I just don't think that's his style of play. I mean, the guy's in the game primarily to guard the other team's best player and, be able to get guys the ball, be a distributor, be a playmaker. I also think the progression from Alex Caravan is going to be huge to this team this year. A lot of programs have him as a potential preseason. And I don't believe he came in as a first team preseason, but more so towards that second or third team, which he's fully capable of doing. And I think they're going to need a scoring jump from him this year. Just, probably jump from 13 points per game to probably in the realm of like 15 to 17 for him this year. And then, of course, I think the biggest issue in terms of talking UConn going into the season is the front court concerns. You're coming off having a tandem of Adama Sanogo and Donovan Clingan 2 years ago to Donovan Clingan and Samson Johnson just a year ago to now you have Samson Johnson and Terrace Reed. Samson Johnson, of course, is not neither Samson Johnson or Terrace Reed is the dominating presence Donovan Clingan was down low in the post as a rim protector. And, Samson Johnson's a guy who's just uber athletic. Terrace Reed has the signs to show that he could potentially end up being somewhat similar to like an Adama Sanogo type player. But up to this point, from what I've heard from Hurley's camp, is that he's just not at that level right now, which is, to be expected. But as where it stands right now, I don't think this front court necessarily might be good enough to have UConn make it back to a Final Four. But of course, you never want to doubt Hurley. The way things normally work with him is the team gets better as the year goes along. And I could definitely see UConn struggling towards the beginning of the season. And then as we reach tournament time, Big East tournament play, and NCAA tournament play, I could definitely see this team beginning to round out and kind of figure out their identity and playing at their best level. So now we talked about all these teams. Let's talk a little bit about some Player of the Year predictions and our first team predictions as well. So for the Big East Player of the Year, I personally have them as my center for my first team All-American team. I mean, just to touch on a little bit what I was talking about. The guy's one of the most underrated players in the sport. I don't understand. He's a 2 or 3 time, can't fully remember, the Big East Defensive Player of the Year, and fully expect him to win it again. Uh, Again, he's the probably best rim protector this season. I think he's going to have to do a lot more on offense this year, which I think he will do for this Creighton team. And again, just to talk a little bit about players who might be in the race for this award, you have Cam Jones, who's going to have pretty high scoring, but more than likely for Marquette this year. I think Bryce Hopkins, you're going to want to watch out for coming back off the ACL tear, but has the full capabilities of getting back to his former self before his injury and competing for this Big East Player of the Year. Kanaye Richmond, I also have in this mix, just because you have to remember he was probably leading the race for this award last year, about midway through the season, until Devin Carter kind of just started to explode offensively. Um, he's like I said, he's in a perfect system, the Rick Pitino system for him as a player. I think he fits that system so well. I think he's going to eat this year. A few other guys I also have in this mix is Eric Dixon. I mean, not much really has to be said about Eric Dixon. He's a great player, grad year, Villanova. He's going to like I said earlier, he's going to be. I think he's going to be really motivated this year to bring Villanova back to winning, back to back on the path of a winning culture. And then just to round this out, throw two UConn guys on there. Alex Caravan. I mean, he's probably going to be a first team Big East player this year. He was preseason first team Big East. And I think Solo Ball's got a chance to break out this year. I think there's a chance he has Jordan Hawkins like freshman to sophomore leap, and he's definitely going to be someone to watch out for this year. So to talk a little bit about my predictions for first team Big East, I have Cam Jones, Kadari Richmond, Bryce Hopkins, Alex Caravan, and Eric Dixon, as well as Ryan Kalkbrenner rounding it out. Again, just a few players to watch. Of course, Solo Ball. I think Aiden Mahaney, UConn too. He has a chance to maybe be a second or third team All Big East type of player. But if he can produce a lot on offense for UConn this year, then I don't see why he couldn't make a Big East team. I also said Devin Smith at St. John's. They're going to need him to be a big contributor this year, not only scoring the ball, but being able to defend at a high level and distribute. I also said Stephen Ashworth at Creighton. Again, I think year two at Creighton is going to be a lot better for Stephen Ashworth. I think he's going to be a lot more consistent of a shooter. And I think he's just going to be able to really analyze the game better as a playmaker, being able to kind of run Creighton sets to a little bit of a higher level than he was able to last year, now being in that system for over a year at this point. I also think the return of Zach Fremantle is going to put him on a watch list for players who could break out this year, even though I wouldn't necessarily know if you call it a breakout with him being a really great player 2 years ago before he got hurt. And then I also said Davian McKnight right there at Xavier with him. Big season last year, has a chance to build on that this year. And then, of course, Jaden Epps at Georgetown. I mean, he's highest scoring returner in the Big East this year, and definitely has a chance to be first team All Big East, I think, if he is able to light up the scoreboard. So just to talk a little bit, I mean, touch really briefly on freshman of the year. My pick's Lee McNeely. I don't really think there's many other freshmen in the Big East this year who are really worth noting that could potentially win this award. I guess you could throw Larry Johnson from Creighton in this race potentially if he gets anywhere close to a semi-high volume of minutes where he needs to be a contributor. But I think he's someone who's probably more so going to break out in years to come rather than this year. But Lee McNeely is probably going to be in a position where he is starting and going to be a major contributor for the UConn team this year. Because that pretty much wraps up the Big East going into this year. As always, to reiterate, I mean, it's a tough physical league. Any team can go into any game with full chance to win. And I think, in terms of who I think wins this league this year, I would probably say UConn should be the odds-on favorite to win this league. But of course, if Creighton is able to get that Fedor Zugic eligible, they'd probably end up being my pick to win the Big East. I also think Xavier is a team you shouldn't count out. Just going back to 2 years ago when they were super good, super explosive offensively, they got guys back like who were injured from, which really hurt them last year, not having those guys. And of course, St. John's, I think you have to watch out for. Of course, Rick Pitino, one of the greatest coaches to ever coach in the sport. He's definitely going to be coming back with a lot of motivation the second year at St. John's. And I think he has the roster to definitely compete for a Big East title this year. So overall, that pretty much wraps up this Big East preseason overview. If you like this episode, please share with your friends. Tell your friends to come watch. It all helps with the algorithm. And until then, I'll see you all next time.